Welcome to the Intentionists podcast, where we explore the interplay between intuition, spiritual health, and everything in between. I'm your host, Amy Schreiber.
And I'm Hilary Zwallen. Our intention is to create a dialogue that inspires you to consciously forge your path with curiosity and compassion for life and its mysteries.
Hello, Intentionists. Today we are diving deep into esoteric ideologies as Hilary chats with Master Numerologist and Astrologer Remington Donovan about magic. They talk about the similarities, differences, and misconceptions around magic with a C, magic with a K, and the mystery school traditions. They also discuss Qabalah as a roadmap, how it intersects with astrology, tarot, and numerology, and how you can apply some of the mystery school concepts into your daily life. Remington Donovan is a Master Numerologist, Qabalistic Tarot reader, astrologer, seer, and teacher of Kundalini yoga living in Los Angeles, California. He was born into the tradition of Swami Satchidananda, learning meditation and yoga directly from him at a very early age. Remington's approach to the teachings of Kundalini yoga, combined with the foundation of nearly 30 years in the Western mystery tradition, gives him a unique voice and greater scope as a spiritual teacher, consultant, and reader. You can find him online at remingtondonovan.com, spelled RemingtonDonovan, and on Instagram as The Mystical Arts. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this episode. I know I did. It was a lot of interesting information that I have always wondered about. So enjoy.
Remington, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hilary, this is a great honor, and I really appreciate it. So I loved talking to you the other day when we touched base. So I think there's a lot to open up here. So thank you for the opportunity.
So excited. So I want to dive right in because I have really enjoyed following your Instagram stories. I feel like your Instagram stories are so informative for people who are curious about tarot and numerology and really just all of it. I feel like you go specific and you explain and you give context and you do it in stories. And I don't know how you're able to pack so much into it. So like, it's so meaty. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. And so
that's an art form in itself, trying to get information on Instagram, because it's got to be quick and impactful and to the point. It's actually a good lesson. And if you actually know what you're talking about, you can get it across.
For sure. So I wanted to ask you then, for our listeners who maybe don't know much about magic, I wanted to talk about the difference between magic with a C, M-A-G-I-C, versus magic with a K, M-A-G-I-K, which is more like the occult, Wicca versus mystery school magic. And so I'd love to just hear what you have to say about that.
Mystery school magic sort of is really where the term got adopted. And it was really historically probably the 20th century. So maybe a little over 100 years ago, late 1800s in Europe, which is where a lot of the sort of Western mystery school, AKA ceremonial magic, its roots are mostly in that culture, although it really roots back to ancient Egypt. So the K was just sort of added to distinguish it between stage magic and
meaning like David Copperfield and
Chris Angel. But this is a very fascinating subject to me, because what I don't think you knew is that I used to actually be a professional stage magician.
Oh, no.
So being a magician, and there's some really interesting parallels that I really want to get into. But really briefly, magic with a K really just is a reference to the sort of essence of every spiritual tradition. Every spiritual tradition holds on to some sort of magic. They hold on to this essence of truth, right? And then over time, spiritual traditions, which become religions. And the teaching was always the magical teaching about a religion is that a religion is the celebration of somebody else's spiritual experience.
Ooh.
Spirituality is the active use of creating and whatever tools you use to create your own spiritual experience, meaning what is expanding your life, what's opening you up to spirit. And Magick recognizes those seeds of truth in every tradition. So Magick is like, what's the true essence? What's, it can be these hidden mysteries, but in definition, Magick is sometimes sort of boring. It literally is just about causing change. So doing the dishes in and of itself could be a magical spiritual practice because the dishes are clean, your house is cleaner, you've expanded your personal experience, you have greater awareness, you've created cleanliness, or you can do deep rituals and meditations and you're invoking angels and God forces and opening up and evolving your soul that way. So the little K, and another little interesting thing is the letter K in Hebrew is Kaf, which has a numerical value of 20, and it relates to the fortune card in the tarot, which relates to the planet Jupiter in astrology, which represents wisdom. So there's sort of an energy of expansion and wisdom. So K adds that dynamic when you start getting into much deeper numerology. So it's the essence and the truth of all of these spiritual traditions, whether it can come through utilizing I Ching, Qabalah. All of these religions had mystery schools. The Christianity came from Gnosticism.
Right.
The magical teaching is it's not Jesus Christ. It was Jesus the Christ. And he was a very highly attained teacher and a high master of these arts.
This is according to the Gnostic Gospels, right?
Well, these are the magical teachings. I used to have some of that stuff and I'd peruse it. It's probably in there, but I would definitely recognize Christ. And there's deeper teachings.
So you're just saying through a magical, if you're looking at through quote unquote, like magic with the K lens at Christianity, this is what you're talking about. Correct? I just want to get
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Continue. That was also a state of consciousness that we all could attain. Mm-hmm. And it even relates to Mercury and astrology. So the idea even with Christ is that Christ is this energy of a link to our highest connection to God.
Right.
And that we can attain that within ourselves. He was just a very high teacher who shared that wisdom in those mysteries. So you become Christianity as a religion then becomes, we're celebrating the things that he did. And those were just his spiritual experiences. Those were his lessons. That's what he had to learn for his incarnation. And that's what we do with so many religions, So magic is always that essence. And it's about what do you do as an individual?
It's your own personal journey. It's your own odyssey versus like following the good book and saying, this is the way and...
Exactly. Now, teachers are definitely essential, but the overall gist of the magical tradition is about discovering and becoming and utilizing to your fullest what is called your will. Now, in sort of even old Bible language, your will, or in so many cultures that means like your ego. But what this really is your divinity, your divine will, and essentially coming into your highest destiny. So if each individual attained their true will, their true divine essence and their life's purpose beyond just what we do for a job, and we come into an alignment, we are creating order within the cosmos. And if we all are doing the thing that's really our thing, we will have a collective humanity that really is in alignment with each other. And we don't really butt heads. And we come into our orbit and we work with the forces of nature. Magic is not what's considered high magic or ceremonial magic. Western mystery school is not about like conjuring forces and manipulating energies and invoking demons and fairies. And
this is an interesting point, right? Because I think that if you're coming from a monotheism, we'll just blanket all of the monotheistic religions into one thing, then this sort of thing, I think unilaterally is like, that's the devil. Like there's a lot of collective fear around when you say like magic or occult or magic mystery school. There's like, I don't know. I don't want to dabble in those dark forces. And then I'm trying to be like God, or whatever it is, or there's like this, the devil's going to get you. So I love that you're bringing up that point, because I think there is this imprinting that's happened where it's like when you talk about what maybe began as, the Eastern concept of like yin and yang, where there's the light and the dark, became this like, there's this duality there's someone's going to get you if you steer out, if you break out of the mold of this is the way and follow this path and don't deviate.
Right. It's interesting. Yeah, no, this is a really important part, because it's not about what people refer to as wizardry, right? The occult, really, its original meaning and what it means to a magician is the hidden wisdom. And so the occult there's something deeper underlying our whole existence. I have some deeper part of me that I'm trying to utilize tools to get in touch with, which is our soul, which is our divinity. The magic is actually called the great work. And literally what that means is union with God. So a lot of people, I feel like, almost get disappointed when they find out, oh, magic's actually all very God-centered, and it's about getting in touch with that part of you. It's not about trying to just manipulate these forces. We open up to some powerful energies, but it's not about, and there's things you can do in meditations or practices that I even utilize with Kundalini yoga to create a lot more prosperity in the world. But just magicians don't put curses on people. They're not hexing people. That's all kind of,
there's got to be some people that are like into that sort of thing, but
oh no, that's a whole world of what people think magic is, and there's people doing that for sure.
But by and large, it's this, at least in my experience, having worked with crystal energy or tarot or just cultivating my own meditation practice in nature, I have come to just find that the word that I use for so much of the stuff in my life is magical, because it feels that way. It feels like, oh my gosh, I sat down and I focused on this one thing, and I tried to, release my, whatever it was, anger or my bad attitude about this or that. And I connected with this plant in this room or whatever it was. And then I saw how I changed instantly, how my attitude changed, how things started showing up for me that I wasn't expecting, how that whole almost cliche concept of manifesting, because it's so popular and zeitgeisty right now, but how that actually does happen. And you do feel like you're suddenly living in a magical world.
And the reason that starts to happen is that you are opening up to a higher, not only awareness, but you're becoming more aligned with just nature. And I mean nature with a capital N, not just I'm going for a nice hike and whatever. And those things are great, but this is like this high concept of the cosmos. As you become more in alignment with that, it opens up a whole window, a whole door of just new existence. And we keep sort of evolving and working up on that. And magic is just, what are the tools that open you up sincerely? Now, we definitely don't like all of this stuff like channeling, working with all these like astral entities and whatnot. Those things don't necessarily serve your best interest. People don't know what they're dealing with. So I usually stay clear of like people that are invoking all these spirits and talking to plants and doing plant medicine, and they're plants. And, those great. I respect plants. The teachings in magic is you never start destroying anything. You wouldn't even ever pick a live flower. You're in harmony with nature. Right. And sure, if you have like, I'm putting a garden up and you have to like plow the land and do things like that, sometimes we have to alter that, but you would never just go pick a flower in the woods or break a tree branch, just to do it. So you're creating a life of harmony. And as if you notice, there's so many, even just meditation alone or crystals. I have crystals all over. We have crystals all over our house. And I like the way they look. They feel good. They sort of hold a nice vibration, but there's a synchronicity that will really open up and like little things. And you've probably seen it as you grow, and many of your listeners, just things start to get into a flow that you're like, wait a minute. And let's say you're like, you want a new job and something you never thought was possible before. And all of a sudden you're getting an email with 3 offers for like major upgrade jobs. And is it because you invoked all these forces and said, I have to have this job? We don't manipulate or control others. That's black magic. Right. When you start to manipulate, control when you hex people because of your own ego and resentment and insecurities.
I mean, I think this is an interesting distinction because there's like the formal, you know, what I would imagine like the Hollywood version of hexing would be, but it's even like when you're speaking ill and you're wishing bad on someone else. Isn't that basically hexing someone? I mean, it's when you're really pushing that energy out there of revenge. It doesn't have to be like, I get out my cauldron and I put the whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can just be shooting the bad vibes all over the place.
Yeah, all of that stuff just eventually will slap you in the face. You know, there's a teaching that I really like. It's always better to compliment than to complain. And, you know, I've seen a lot of stuff just through social media, and it was even like a Newsweek article about these witches that were hexing Donald Trump. And the reality is from the magical perspective, and probably most spiritual traditions would say, you know what, it's going to be a lot better to send the energy of blessings and love, because I'd rather have that frequency influencing people's decisions. Where if we send out, now a lot of the work we do, so even if you're meditating and getting in touch with yourself and being open to these practices or doing yoga or doing magic, you're shifting consciousness on the astral plane. You're not trying to manipulate and control intentionally, but you're creating a higher energy. So maybe that energy sending positive blessings someone will say, you know what, I was going to do something really destructive, like start World War III, but maybe that's not a good idea, you know. But if you're always sending a negative input, you're just creating a lot more negativity, and it's only going to implode on itself. So
I feel like we could go into a whole topic on activism, because I have a hard time knowing, you know, we need activists, we need people to go and shake things up. On the one hand, because it's like there has to be, you know, otherwise we're just pretending like things aren't happening. But then once we're there, now what, right? How do we, you know, I just struggle with the balance between, you know, activism and holding space for peace and love. And I don't have the answers to this, but you know, this is one of these questions that I kind of pop up there and go, you know, how can I do this better? How can I be a better citizen? How can I hold space for women who are in pain? How can I hold space for minorities who are in pain? How can I, you know, I don't know, you know, and I don't have the answers.
I mean, I think about this, I mean, probably every day. And the one thing I know is I have my role, and my role is to hold these teachings. Is my role to share this. I do a lot of private sessions with people, and it's my role in my own small world to help people grow and evolve. And hopefully some of those people are some of the people that, you know, cause change directly. But, you know, on some level, how much can I do? And not, you know, I mean, sure, go protest, but if every individual sort of finds what's the right way, some people really cause change by running for office and doing things, and that's like who they are. And, you know, I know for me, I know my role, and my role is to be a teacher, and I'm a reader, and a lot of change. The magical belief is so much change of the consciousness of humanity happens through a higher plane and a higher dimension. Mm-hmm. It's not so obvious. It's not always the thing that's right in your face. Mm-hmm. So as we work on that, we are shifting consciousness. So it kind of will come down to, oh, maybe people will vote a different way, but you know, you can get lost and just completely embroiled in the political thicket that is
and the drama,
already.
Really.
Oh, yeah. It's just an outlet for people's resentments. And then you're a Republican, you represent this. You're a Democrat, you have to be that, or you can only be one or the other. And It's already such a mess. The system is so rigged, and there's so much gerrymandering. That's not my world. It's some people's world. I voted. But the reality is, I don't even know what half the people look like that I voted for. I cause change in other ways. That's my personal incarnational job.
I love your point to the personal. There's a lot of freedom internalizing the belief of like, I know my part. Like when you say that, it makes me feel like, oh, okay. Like when someone knows, like, okay, here's how I fit into the puzzle. Like, I know that this is what I'm doing. I feel like it gives other people the freedom to go, oh, wait, I don't have to necessarily do what this person does or that person does. I can go inward and say, how is it that I can show up? How is it that I can make the difference internally? And how does that happen? We had this, we talked a little bit about this last week with Lisa as well. And it's just something that I think is just up for people. So thank you for that wisdom. I think that's great. I wanted to ask you about, where does tarot and numerology and astrology, I know you have all of these tools in your toolkit. Mm-hmm. How do these all fit together for you, and also just in the topics we've been discussing?
Your questions are great. Can I backtrack on one thing and then answer that? I just wanted to touch on stage magic really quick.
Oh yeah, sure.
And stage magic, I was drawn to when I was like in my early 20s. I went into a magic shop. As I was fully enmeshed in the mystery school and magical tradition at that time in my life. And I went to a magic trick shop, and the guy showed me a little card trick, and my mind was blown. And I was like, I want that trick. How much? And it was like a trick deck for like $14. And you pick a card, and it's always the card on top. And I was so elated, and it opened something so much in me. And the parallel, though, even though it's stage magic, it still is this beautiful art that originally was meant to open up people's psyches and people's consciousness that, whoa, maybe there's a deeper reality. Maybe there's a deeper mystery. Maybe there's something going on in the universe that I just can't put my eye on and explain so rationally. And even in India, there's a tradition, they're called the fakers. And people think that they're trying to be fake yogis that are like, look, I have all these what are known as the city powers, which are like the powers of all this wizardry, and I can manipulate forces, and I can freeze time, I can read your mind, all that kind of stuff. And they would do these tricks, like the Indian rope trick is a famous one. You can look up old magic books where they'd be levitating on a rope, or they'll boil tea on their head. They're all tricks. They're all stage magic. But the magician really believes this. The mystery school magician with the K believes that those tools still are this way to open people up. So there's a lot of parallels, even though it's stage magic. It really is mind bending, and it's opening. So it's actually doing the same thing that we're doing with spiritual practices. So
it cultivates wonder.
Exactly. Even when I see like a magic show and I may know how it's done, I don't care. I just let it go. And that sense of wonder may bring you to other realities, and it expands your consciousness. Mm-hmm. So it's still, there's something sacred in it. So I was just really drawn to it, but I'm sort of retired from that world because it takes endless practice. But as far as tarot, numerology, astrology, I can share from me what it all is an extension of is mystical Qabalah.
Okay.
And Qabalah is really just it's kind of the stamp. It's the system of here's the universe. Here's how the cosmos is working. So everything is interconnected. I think any new age person out there, even probably every spiritual tradition at its core, is going to say, okay, all traditions are really saying the same thing. What I like about Qabalah is it's just this neutral imprint that you can put every single system into it. Like, a lot of people don't understand that tarot is numerology and is astrology. So let's say, like, I pick a card every day on my Instagram, and yesterday it was like the 3 of Wands. And I know that is the sun in Aries, and it's the number 3. And all of these come together to form a symbol of some energy frequency, which is this card called Virtue. And it's great energy for moving forward and standing in your honor and kind of taking action in the world. So with Qabalah, all systems start to become a fluid integration. So for me, just from being immersed in it, since I was a teenager. So to date myself, I guess about 30 some odd years, I've been working with that system, and everything becomes very harmonious. So there's a language, there's a hidden language through these tools that opens up that you start to see. So, the tarot exists without tarot cards. Astrology exists without planets, and numerology sort of exists without numbers. It's not always about what you're seeing, but these represent different archetypal vibrational energy frequencies. So it's always a thing that opens up. So I may look at, you can really get obsessed like looking at addresses and license plates. But for me, I may see the number 7 somewhere and say it's following me around all day. Well, I know that we can start to apply, okay, what is the 7th tarot card of the major arcana? It's the Lover's card. Or what is the 7 on the Tree of Life? Is Netzach, which means victory, which is the world of Venus. And now it's the color green. So I could start to tell a story. So I use these tools to tell a story about, when I do readings with people, I'm really telling a story about their soul and their incarnation. And it's really just a very integrated system. And I do encourage people, if they're starting to learn tarot or numerology, it's good to know some of the basics, but don't make it an intellectual study. It becomes an opening of intuition. Tarot is really a sacred book that's meant to open up your consciousness to your higher self. At some point, you don't even need tarot.
Right.
But I always use it because I like to have the visual. It's something I personally have a relationship with. But when I do a session with somebody, I am pulling in on astrology, tarot, numerology, and visions that I see. And it all comes under, for me, it's all mystical Qabalah.
And do you find too, if you're using tarot for yourself, that a lot of times it's more just getting confirmation to what you were already. It's like you're feeling things. You're like, something's coming, or whatever, and then you do a spread, and you're like, oh, there you go. Thank you for the validation. No,
both. That's absolutely, because we all kind of have this internal knowing, but it's nice to use a tool that confirms it. Mm-hmm. But at the same token, tarot is really good to separate from what your mind is thinking, because you may have all these obsessive negative thoughts, of like, I see it all the time with like people wanting to know about a relationship, or somebody has a crush on a girl, or a girl has a crush on a guy, or whatever you're having crushes on. And it's always this obsession. But what it does, tarot will say, this is what's happening in your head, versus, oh, you feel like a pathetic loser and you're overweight and you're never going to accomplish anything in your life, to, oh, here's the reality of the situation, and you have really good opportunities to work in this sort of career or field or whatever it is. So it does help with just distinguishing like what's going on. That's just my ego thinking. That most of my experience are usually people thinking that they're less than. Occasionally you get someone who's overly confident and delusional, but those people usually aren't coming for readings, right. But at the same token, so much of it, people say, oh my God, this confirms everything I was feeling. I was afraid to take action in that direction. But now that I hear it from someone who doesn't even know me, and my chart and my numerology and the tarot really confirm it, I now have permission and confidence and more faith. A lot of it is faith, but the magician doesn't believe in blind faith. It's faith based on science, meaning, hey, this actually works. Okay, now that I have experience that it works, I can move forward. And we're in a different consciousness of humanity. Blind faith doesn't work anymore. Like, it's just like if you downloaded an app on your phone and it wasn't really working, right? It's like, I don't know, a weather app that was supposed to really pinpoint your location and tell you something, and it just every other time, and it was not that accurate. And someone said, no, you just have to have faith and it'll work. You're just not going to buy into it.
Right.
But if you start to use it and you're like, oh, this works, you start to just naturally have faith based on that experience. So that having that trust in spirit, when it really gets confirmed through something like tarot, it really opens up your ability to expand and move forward. So I find it a great tool to give you the confidence. But almost all of my readings, they know deep down inside, but we're afraid to act on it, or we don't really trust that we know. So we don't have faith in our ability in that.
Well, it's a great point, because I think of our listeners, if they've listened to this podcast, they know that we both, she and I, had a faith crisis and left the Mormon church. And so I found that, in the last several years, it's like, I'm always a little bit skeptical of every modality that I start walking into, but I find that it's really comforting when you find certain aspects where you feel like, oh my gosh, like I just have a faith that there's like way more going on here than we see or know. And it gives me a lot of comfort to be like, I don't understand everything, but I'm getting these little sprinklings. And it's not just with a male god, or it's not just within these limited parameters where like everything has to fit into this box and work this way. It's really nice. Like what I've liked about tarot and crystals and really just kind of being open to all of it is that there's all kinds of ways that you can connect, and that spirit can connect with you, and that you can kind of engage with, like you've said, with these other realities, with these other kind of this multidimensional experience that's going on. We just get little snippets of it here and there as we move through with these readings and whatnot. Well,
ultimately, those tools are just about awakening your divine consciousness. And those are great techniques and tools to utilize that will bring you forward. And I just love how it can really instill some confidence. And one of the first sort of lessons in the magical tradition, it's on the Tree of Life, is discrimination or discernment, meaning, you got to apply a little intelligence, and you can't believe, especially nowadays. And I live in Los Angeles, which is Charlatansville of just crazy kooks and hacks and false prophets. And, and sometimes you just have to apply a little common sense to say, is this really a thing? Is this really a thing that's going to serve my soul? And so it's always good. And I really encourage people that are really exploring their spiritual growth and what's their path or what's their tradition, is start exploring, keep a really open mind, but apply that discernment and apply some awareness. And you got to be just kind of real about it. And there's so much stuff I could sit on this whole podcast, like criticizing all of these ridiculous things out there. And sometimes it's a little fun to goof around about it. And like, there's just so much ridiculous stuff. In LA, I see it constantly from weird healer this, and they have no real training. They don't come from any type of tradition or spirituality. They don't have a teacher, but at the same token, you never know. What I encourage people to start to explore it, because then you put a signal to the universe and to your soul that says, well, I'm making an effort to explore my spiritual growth. I'm really fascinated by your story to come from what I would imagine is a very strict, certain kind of limited tradition on one level, and to say, wait, there's more I want to experience. And as you do that, the first thing you may try, that may not be the thing that's your thing, but by starting that process, the right things, the right teachers, the right modalities, they're going to come your way. Right.
That's definitely been the case for me, I feel.
Well, I grew up on a certain very open-minded spiritual tradition, but it's not it sort of is my thing, but it's not my thing. I still had to find the tools and the way, and even all of the Western mystery school, the ceremonial magic, or sometimes called Hermetic magic.
Can you explain what Hermetic magic is versus what we've been talking about on?
Well, that's all ceremonial magic, Western mystery school, Hermetic magic, Rosicrucianism. Some people may call it mystic Christianity. People think it's like Qabalah. They assign it only to Judaism, and we utilize Qabalah. We're not Christians. We're not Jews. We're not Muslims. We don't adhere to any religion, but Hermeticism is what that tradition is.
Is it like connecting with the archetypes
it's really connecting with the vibrational frequencies of the universe. Mm-hmm. The first teaching in magic, besides discernment and discrimination, is you make yourself a fit receptacle. Mm. Like when I saw The Secret come out and everyone was just buzzed about, like, all you got to do is think about it, and I'm going to have a new Porsche, and
that never made sense
beautiful,
to me. Yes.
a beautiful girlfriend. I was like, you know how many Porsches and models I'd be dating right now? That's always my joke about it. But there's some truth in that, but they're pulling off of the Hermetic tradition that you are working. It's always an inside job. everything that you want to manifest comes down to making yourself a fit receptacle. So I could pray right now and do some meditations and a ritual to say, I want to be the best airplane pilot on the planet, right? Well, I'm not a fit receptacle for that. I don't know the first thing about flying a plane. So I will receive that on one level, but I'm not the caliber of person that could carry out that task.
Right.
You know, I'm not going to go, so you want to be the best pilot? Well, you got to go to, you probably have to start with learning how to fly, going to Air Force Academy, and then going into the Air Force, and whatever you have to do for those steps.
Right.
That would make you a fit receptacle. So when we want to manifest, a lot of the change is what we do here. People I always have this joke, and I've seen it, I've witnessed it, even in my Kundalini practices, in my yoga practices, where people really need a job, right? And they're literally like, I have to pay my rent in 5 days. And I'm like, well, what are you doing to get a job? And they're like, well, I'm doing all these prosperity meditations. I'm like, well, have you applied for a job? It even says in the Bible, faith without works is dead. Right? You have even the Bible that gets so misinterpreted, you have to put in the work in the real world.
Well, it's such an illustration of kind of being out of balance, right? It's like there has to be a level within the esoteric and within the desire to maybe transcend what we would call the mortal realm. You have to still be in the mortal realm, right? You still have to live here on the earth and, chop wood, carry water, right?
Exactly. And I feel like some of that, I see it in sort of this modern abundance manifestation new age world, although I have experienced crazy things happen. But I also was doing some work because they came to me because I was a fit receptacle. There was I had the ability or the intelligence to adapt to certain situations, or have one big Hollywood thing happen for me, and a writing thing. And I was ready for it. And that presented itself, and also there's a lot of one of the other teachings in Magick is you kind of do things without the lust of result, or some Buddhist traditions call this the hungry ghost. And when we're so fixated on the outcome and not just being so enraptured with just the joy of the process of everything that we're doing, we'll always sort of fall short. And that's even in the Bible, that's going to be this lust, the negative lust, where we just have to have something so bad that we will just whatever it takes to get there. That's why I hate a lot of these TV shows that came out years ago, like Survivor. It still perpetuates this idea there can only be one winner, and no matter what you do, as long as you win, it justifies being a total schmuck.
Yeah.
Then I won. Take it to the bank, right? I sold my soul and everything, but I went to the bank and cashed a check, and only one person is allowed to do that.
Well, and even when you're talking about the idea of being a fit receptacle, right? That's how you put it. Mm-hmm. It's almost like we have to hold the big vision loosely and not be so fixated on the details of it has to look this way, because then we will be disappointed. But holding that frequency, holding that loosely up above, and then, like you said, do everything we can down here to work towards that goal, but continue to, connect to that frequency that's a little bit higher, that's bigger vision. Or how can I... The question I ask myself often when I'm thinking about the business projects I'm working on, or the creative projects I'm working on, is just how can I hold a bigger vision? What is it that I'm not seeing that I could be a container for?
Yeah, no, the very well said. And it's even my personal, I'm always it's good to be specific, yet you need to also be open to a much bigger possibility. And sometimes when you just get in alignment with divine will, you look at these older spiritual traditions, or you'll hear I didn't grow up Christian, but the ashram spiritual community that I grew up with, there was our main teacher, who was Swami Satchidananda, who's one of the biggest yogi guys to come over from India and teach. He was a religious studies scholar. So he talked a lot through Christianity because he knew he would appeal to people that grew up with that in this culture, in our culture. And so this idea of God's will is really the modern, like I call it like the life coach world of manifestation and abundance, is like, that's our destiny, right? Everybody's trying to come into our destiny, but we often have destinies that just aren't what our egos and our mind thinks. And I have a really good story I don't always like to share, but it was my personal experience. And I was praying. I really wanted to go on this trip to this spiritual retreat that's very much a part of my Kundalini practice. And it really meant a lot. And at the time, I was like in transition a number of years ago, and I was working at a store, like vitamin store, and wasn't like a ton of money at all. And I was like, I don't know if I can pull off, like, can I afford to take all the time off from work? Then the trip itself is expensive, et cetera, et cetera. And I just prayed that I would make it on this trip and I'd be able to go and there'd be no problems. Well, I prayed for that at this little center that I like to go to in LA that just resonates with me spiritually. And literally a couple of days later, a friend of mine who was working on a huge film project texted me and he said, "Oh, I have the ability to pitch some stories to a huge movie studio." This is huge, mainstream, very mainstream project with it's a Lego movie. And he said, "You have to write a story. They might be able to use it. At least I can show them the idea." Well, I wrote the story and the whole thing, and this huge studio said yes. It turned into a huge film project and played in 4,500 theaters. It was my first like Hollywood writing thing. And the point that I'm making is that wasn't in my plan. I just wanted to get to this little spiritual retreat for like, probably a total of not even $2,000. But at the time working at a store, that was a lot for me then. And all of a sudden I get some movie deal. That was not what I was trying to work on. So I'm glad I just said, I want to get here. Let's open up the channels of what can happen. And that afforded me the ability to go several times.
Well, and seeking adjacent possibilities. That's been one of my little mantras. And I keep seeing it kind of popping up as we get so focused on how we think it's going to be. And it's almost like you want to be looking in the periphery of like, you just never know what other really interesting, exciting thing could be available to you when you're not having tunnel vision.
And that's when you just have that sense of wonder. And that's where you have some trust that maybe there is like a beneficent universe and there's higher forces that actually love you and are trying to work in your favor. And if we just get in alignment with that, and at the same time, it's good to have direction and focus. I deal with too many people. Like one of my most challenging clients will be someone who's really financially successful, generally through, say, a trust fund or something. And they don't really have to do anything. And so they have no ambition. And it's hard to guide when it's like, okay, well, you're not really doing anything. You're kind of on a big picture, inadvertently sort of lazy with no focus and nothing specific in your life. And sometimes when you have some specific goals, if you take that action to move forward on the specificity of it, yet be open to the bigger possibility, that's where you really get the momentum going. Because you're going to, even when I do a reading, specific questions are great. And even I was just listening to a thing. There's this Marie Forleo. She's like kind of this big life coach, business
I'm familiar with her. She's on YouTube and Facebook.
Not my general aesthetic or style, but there's something about her that I like. And I just happened to catch this little thing that I really agreed with. And it's a magical teaching that sometimes even with gratitude lists or making things that we want, sometimes being specific, like, oh, I want to travel the world, but maybe say, oh, I'd really like to go to Italy and eat pasta in this area and go to this old cathedral. It starts to hone it in and we can solidify a lot more. And it works. It's just letting go of being attached to the outcome so much,
I love that.
Before we part, we'd like to say thanks for listening, and we hope you'll connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. We would love to hear from you and appreciate all feedback, shares, and likes.
To learn more and subscribe to our newsletter, visit Intentionists.com. And no matter where you are or what you're creating, we send you love and invite you to breathe and begin.
See you next week.